brotherhood, multiplication, restoration. We are Sin Network. We're a family, planting churches together. Join us as we hear from leaders of this movement from across North America and discover what it really takes to plant churches everywhere for everyone.
Today we're talking with Chip Dodd, founder of Sage Hill Counseling Center, about how overcoming our trauma helps us become compassionate to others.
Chip, you know, in 2016, when President Trump was elected, you know, I remember being on, you know, just looking at the, you know, channel surfing, going to Fox, CNN, CNBC, going on all these different stations, you know, and these stations can't agree on anything,
Right.
you know. But that night, they agreed on one thing. They said, our country is divided. Our country is divided. Our country is divided. And I kept hearing that over and over again. And then, you know, I started thinking about my church. I started thinking about Blueprint. And I just remember just thinking about, man, our church is divided because we had people at our church that voted for President Trump. And we have people in our church that think that if you voted for President Trump, you're the devil, right? And really these two worlds, and this is during the time where, you know, with all Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, or White Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. So all these tensions. And so we need to address this. We talked about it. And I remember getting our church together and talking to one another and, you know, and dividing them up and just saying, and just the tension. And one of the things that I recognized in that was when we're talking about race, we're talking about issues of trauma. Yes. Traumatic things that we can't really even talk about race because this is so emotionally, you know, just traumatic, you know, that's coming from it, that we got to first deal with our emotions. And that was one of the things that led me to, you know, preaching on a series called 18 Inches, which was basically preaching kind of the 8 emotions, taking you the 18 inches from your head to your heart. And that really helped so much for us. Why do you think what is the role of emotions when in dealing with traumatic events?
That's a great question. But I want to say first that the very fact that you could step into that with the congregation and walk all the way through the tension and get a result that brought fellowship is pretty significant. Would you not say? I mean, it was like, it's like, how many people would avoid it? How many people wouldn't step into it? And how many people would step into it? And what happens is massive reaction instead of truthful response. And that kind of begins to answer what you're asking, the response versus reaction. Because what trauma is, and it gets massively underestimated in terms of what it is and its power, because we always think of trauma as earthquake, war, rape. All true, all true. But what trauma really is when a human being, especially in their upbringing, the kind that you're talking about, people get real reactive, in your upbringing, if you experience things that take away the voice of the heart because your capacity to say them is silenced by a power over you, okay? And that can, which of course has to do with race, has to do with culture, has to do with socioeconomic position, education, regions. I mean, it's like life happening for some groups more than others. But the thing is, wherever you wound up being helpless, then your voice of the heart gets frozen because your feelings are your enemy instead of your feelings being a way to find connection. Because when you're in trauma, there's nobody listening. Now, what's amazing about trauma, and this is so practical, when a person gets hurt, just very practical, when a person gets hurt and they're bleeding, say a cut or a broken bone, if that wound is not attended to and brought back to full functioning, it will still heal. But it heals with excessive scar tissue, or the bone heals with where the person's like, it still has calcification all around it. And that's what trauma does to us. It creates scar tissue. And it's not so much what happened to a person that traumatizes them, it's what happens inside them that decides what the impact of the trauma is. If a person gets healing, the trauma's resolved.
Can you explain that? Explain that. What do you mean by
Yeah,
that?
like when a person is rendered helpless, they're in loneliness, fear, sadness. They're in grief. They're in anger. They're in hurt. They're in shame. They feel ashamed because they couldn't stop themselves from being helpless. So the only person to blame is themselves, because if you blame the one who did it, you got more helplessness.
Okay.
So when this wound occurs, the scar tissue is what covers up the feelings. It covers up the normal healing, normal functioning. And we know that scar tissue does two things. It numbs the spot that was wounded, and it makes a person inflexible. So trauma numbs the heart and makes the heart inflexible, makes our thinking inflexible, because we read everything around us as the same thing potentially happening again. So my trauma makes a person make sure they never get wounded again, instead of revealing their hearts with the possibility that a wound could occur. And what you did in your church that day, people took the risk through them trusting, hoping, trusting God, and also you had been teaching the 18 inches. These people knew the language of being able to live fully in a tragic place. They knew the language of feel your feelings, tell the truth, and just give it to the process. God owns the process. My job is to respond to life, not react against it. So these people were telling the truth instead of acting based upon the actions of others. That's what traumatized people do. They take action based upon the actions of others.
So you talked about trauma brings about numbness and inflexibility. When you're dealing with traumatic issues like that, how does that personify itself, in these types of conversations where there seems like there's a lot of impasse?
Yeah, so reactivity like that, when a person anticipates that they're going to be rendered helpless, rendered vulnerable, exposed to more pain, literally the nervous system kicks on, and it turns on fight, flight, freeze, or appease, which is reactivity. Because that's anxiety reaction. Anxiety is all about making sure that I'm never rendered helpless, and so I'm looking for the enemy all the time. So it's fighting. It's like deciding, because you look a certain way, you're this way, and therefore we're already anxious and defensive before we even get up close to them. We've already decided what it's going to be like. And so reactivity is assessing the present based upon my experiences of the past that are unresolved. That's the inflexibility and the numbness. And reactivity is a way of not having to feel. Because we see people think that feelings are resentment and rage and apathy, depression, and anxiety. We think those are feelings. Those aren't feelings. Those are reactions against having to feel. So when a person gets hurt, either they get healing and the bone gets set, the wound gets healed, and they come back to full functioning, right? Or to protect themselves and have more hurt, they become resentful. It's like, hey, I'm gonna make you pay for the pain I have. So, and then it leads to vengefulness, and then it leads to isolation, then it leads to fighting all the time.
So what's the difference between reactivity? How are we to respond if we know that I'm dealing with a traumatic event and it does bring about in a certain types of emotions? What am I supposed to do with them?
Yeah, so amazingly, the healing for trauma is the counterintuitive opposite of what we think will fix us. It's doing the very thing we're running from. The healing for trauma, because trauma is a feeling sickness, it's a feeling numbness, it's a feeling inflexibility. So we have to go back and do the very thing that we are pretty sure will get us killed, and say what we feel. Tell the truth about where you were, what happened, and where you are now.
And you're not just talking about recapping history. You're talking about how does that history make you feel?
Yes.
But why would I want to do that? That would empower you. If I said, you make me angry, I've just empowered you to say, you can make me angry, and I've empowered you. I don't want you to have that type of power.
Exactly.
Like, you just hurt me.
Yes.
I'd rather not tell you that.
Yes.
And then just figure out another way. Like, why would I want to do that?
And then you stay the same, and so do I. So if you take the risk, and this is not just with the public, This is with people you want to be in relationship with or need to be in relationship with or called to be in relationship with, you know? But when you say, I feel hurt by what you said. I feel hurt by how you looked at me in a certain way. So you're giving me opportunity. You're challenging me. You're actually saying, I want to be in relationship with you, but I can't be unless you're capable of doing the same thing I'm doing. Feeling your feelings, telling the truth, and showing up. Because if we can't connect, we can't be in relationship. So crazy as it sounds, the person who's taking the risk is the one who has the strength. Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Because I'm challenging you to show up in heart, but I have to have a courage about that. Right. I've got to have a fellowship behind me that I can go to when the world kicks me in the face again. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But we're created for relationship. We're created to find fulfillment in relationship. And wherever there's trauma and the division that follows, there's isolation, there's friction, there's revenge seeking, there's people making payments against it, there's exclusivity, there's unhealthy tribe togetherness, there's closed communities.
So what do we do with the trauma when we come, like, you know, my parents are growing up, you know, or people who are dealing with traumatic childhoods, and then they come and they just know, I desire to have a relationship. Yeah. I believe in what you're saying. I'm willing to be vulnerable. But I'm going to be left to numbness.
Yeah, so what the question ends up being, what are you willing to do to have what you seek? Are you willing to feel?
Yeah.
Are you willing to tell the truth about what happened?
What if I'm willing to feel, but the other person I'm confessing that is not willing to feel?
Yeah, it's like that's where you're kind of stuck. See, that's what it's amazing. It's like for trauma to heal, the person who has the trauma is willing to tell the truth because they want healing. They want to get out of the coffin of inflexibility and the numbness of a calloused heart, right? It's like, I want to live because we're made to want to live. So the person has to take a risk, but you're made to take a risk with somebody who knows the experience of pain, trauma, life itself too.
So, but if the other person is unwilling to, is my numbness and inflexibility tied to that person's response? You know,
that's a great question, because if your inflexibility and numbness is tied to that other person's actions, then they own you. Trauma sets you free. I mean, healing from trauma sets you free. Free to have the courage to say the truth, free to take the risk of speaking into where the trauma comes from, and giving opportunity for there to be this thing called we're made to be together. Reconciliation means to meet again. I mean, I've seen stuff over the years that, well, you would believe, but for fathers and sons and mothers and daughters and families and old friends and people from such disparity of differences, cultural differences, find fellowship like a love fellowship that they've never had at home. They've never had with their kinfolks. They've never had with their friends. You know, and there's this old movie with Mel Gibson called We Were Soldiers. And he was saying that when you go into giving yourself to something that matters, in this case, they were talking about war. When you go and you give yourself to something that you volunteer to participate in, that means you're not going to care what color the man is standing beside you, or where he came from, or what his upbringing was, or what his education was, or how much money he has. What you want to know is, are you going to show up with me in this? Yeah. And then Mel Gibson, he's a colonel, but it's not, you know, he said, I promise you this for those of you who are risking, who are investing your hearts, your hands and your heads into this, that I will make sure you come home. You may not come home alive, but you'll come home. I'll be the first one to set foot on the battlefield and the last one to come off. It's like, whew. God has created us to be moved by those words. Yeah. And trauma separates us from being able to be moved into doing things greater than we can do apart.
Yeah.
Trauma is the divider.
You have a quote, you talk about passion, and the passion is a willingness to endure the pain for something that's greater than the pain.
Yeah.
People who have been gripped with trauma, and I think we all have, and to some degree,
Sure.
we have been gripped with trauma. And now I'm like, I no longer want this trauma. I no longer want to deal, but I
I wanna
know
live
that
again.
I want to live again. But I know that I'm taking it to places that's been their impairment. That's just that's just how they have coped with life.
Yeah.
And they're not willing to meet me and even acknowledge the damage, acknowledge the trauma that
So that's either
is there.
traumatizing again, and it's time to stop it. It's time to stop going there.
Yeah.
You can't make a person, make a thing. You can't make the world different, but we can grieve the difference it won't be.
Yeah.
So especially with friends, families, groups of people, you say, I'm feeling this way, I'm hurting this way, I'm aching this way, and it goes to deaf ears and blind eyes, then you will literally have to go grieve. You will have to go find solace in community of like believers. And then through that strength, now this is what's wild, we are actually able to develop compassion for the very people who have been our enemies
Yeah.
through trauma healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
Traumatized people traumatize other people.
So
Passing it on.
if a person is saying, I'm not gonna play the victim, but I'm not also gonna confess. I'm just gonna deal with it. Like what happens? Because I'd rather not do my work. I'd rather not try to live again. What happens to that person? If they just said, I'm just gonna maintain my inflexibility. I'm just gonna maintain my numbness. What's the alternative?
Well, if they decide that's how they're going to live, then it's so sad, Dhati. It's like you just named how most of the world lives. I mean, you literally just said, well, there it is. For the person who wants to do like that, that is the most common reaction to life. I'll do whatever I got to do to make sure life doesn't affect me. Yeah. So amazingly, when that person gets buried, the people who, if there are any at the funeral, they come, and the closest they have to grief is grieving for who they never knew. But see, you and I want to live in a way when we're laid in the ground, we're not going to know. But we would love for people to come grieve the loss of who they knew. Because if we're not known, others suffer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a responsibility to become known in heart.
Yeah, and I think we have been such, characterized by that.
Yeah.
I was, in Atlanta, there's this thing called the MARTA, and it's basically our train station. And I remember I'm a good church planner. So as a good church planner, at some point you got to take the urban, the trails. And so anyway, I'm on the MARTA bus or the MARTA train. And what's interesting is that as I'm there during the times, it's really crowded and all of the things that's going on. And it's just like so interesting that the goal is for no one to talk to anyone. Like all these people on the bus, we're reading this sign again and over again, like things are changing. And I just recognized that there was a term that kind of came to me at that time. It's like, this is a picture of the church. This is a picture of how we live. This is crowded loneliness.
Yes.
There's a whole bunch of people around, but there's such loneliness.
Yes.
And I think that type of impact is how so many of us is just like, instead of being known, instead of seeking intimacy, instead of risking, we just kind of like, we'll put people around, but we're still so isolated and so lonely.
You get nothing from it except the pretending that something happened.
Yeah.
And maybe tomorrow will be different. We'll go do it the same. When a person has trauma, they are ashamed of having insight. They're ashamed of vulnerability of being human. And either they harm themselves by shaming themselves, or they become shameless and act out on other people. But people are suffering physical, mental ailments, relational ailments directly related to the inability to say, I hurt, I'm sad, I'm lonely, can you see me?
Yeah.
And instead, you said crowded loneliness was a great expression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is all about going back to being human.
It's all about feeling your feelings, telling the truth to the right people, and giving yourself back to the process of how you were born to be. It really is. It's hard work, too.
Thank you. Thank you for giving your life to this.
Oh, man.
And, and I think what God is doing is going to be able, through your life and through your passion, God is going to use you and the books that you have written as tools to helping people to experience the same
Thank
freedom.
you. Thanks, Dhati.
Thank you.
Glad I met you.